Don't just look, Cowboy. Something bit me between my legs. Suck out the venom before it spreads.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sky had turned the color of rust by the time Michael Creel finished chopping wood behind the barn. The day had been long, dry, and hot, like every other that season, but something about the way the air held still made him uneasy. He stood with his hands on his hips, back stiff from the work, eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Not for anyone in particular. He just didn't like surprises. Michael was 40. He didn't look it from a distance, but up close, the lines on his face told the story. Years as a cavalry horse wrangler had given him scars under the shirt, a bad knee that acted up when the weather shifted, and a way of reading people that didn't rely on their words. Folks in town didn't ask him much. He wasn't rude, just quiet. After the flood that took his wife and son 3 years back, he'd moved into this old ranch tucked between two mesas, rebuilt it with his own hands, and stayed clear of anything that didn't need his help. That evening, he was walking back toward the house with a bucket when movement caught his eye near the dry trail that cut past the trough. A figure, low to the ground. Too small to be a man, too slow to be riding. He stopped cold. His fingers tightened on the bucket handle. The sun was low, making it hard to see details, but he could tell someone was crawling. He walked closer, boots crunching on packed dirt. 30 yards out, he saw her clearly, barefoot, dress torn across the back and shoulders, one hand dragging behind her like it wasn't working right. Her legs were coated in dust, knees scraped raw, and blood darkened the side of her thigh. She didn't look up until he was 5 steps away. Her voice barely came out. "Don't look between my legs, cowboy. Something bit me." Michael didn't answer. He set the bucket down, knelt beside her slowly, eyes narrowing on the wound. Her thigh was already swollen near the top, just below the line of her underwear. 2 puncture marks sat deep, surrounded by angry red flesh. Snakebite, close to the femoral artery. He didn't ask what kind of snake. It didn't matter. He unbuckled the knife from his belt. Her hand jerked toward him weakly. "I said don't. I'm not here to hurt you," he said. That was all. No comfort, no smile. He slid the blade through the cloth gently, exposing the injury. The bite looked fresh, maybe less than an hour. Her leg was twitching. He leaned in, sucked hard once, spat in the dirt, then again. Blood mixed with saliva. He didn't speak. Her fingers dug into the ground. She passed out. Michael cut a clean strip from the hem of her dress, tied it tight above the wound, then slid his arms beneath her. She was lighter than she should have been. Her head lolled against his chest. She was burning up already. Inside, he moved quickly. Clear the cot. Set her down. His cabin was one room, with stove, work table, bunk in the corner, shelves lined with jars and tools. He went to the kettle, poured hot water into a tin cup, added crushed poppy root from a pouch in the drawer, and stirred it with a spoon until the powder dissolved. He lifted her head gently, braced her neck with one hand, and eased the cup to her lips. She gagged once, then swallowed. As she lay there, breathing shallow, he got a better look at her. Late 20s, maybe, Apache features mixed with something else, maybe Mexican. Her face was sunburned, skin cracked, lips blistered. Her wrists had bruises. So did her ankles. Some were new. Michael checked her pulse. Weak, but there. He moved to his workbench, pulled out a worn cloth, cleaned the blade he'd used, then went back to the cot and sat down on the crate beside it. He didn't take off his boots, just leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching her chest rise and fall. She'd run. That much was clear. He didn't know from who or how far. But the bite hadn't killed her yet. She had a chance. He would give her that. The room was silent except for the slow creak of the roof boards cooling in the evening air. Michael didn't try to make sense of why she was there. It didn't matter. She needed help. That was enough. For now, he would watch. For now, he would stay. He didn't plan to sleep. Not tonight. The room smelled faintly of burnt wood and iron. Maeva opened her eyes slowly, lids stuck from dried sweat. Her throat hurt. Her head throbbed. She didn't move right away. The ceiling above her was made of rough-hewn planks. One of them cracked clean through. It creaked when wind pushed against the outside walls. For a second, she couldn't remember where she was. Her body ached too much to guess. Then it came back in flashes. The brush tearing her skin, the rattle in the grass, the cowboy's boots near her face, the pressure on her leg. His hands, not rough, not greedy, just efficient, focused. Then darkness again. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her thigh and made her gasp. A voice spoke before she could fall back. Careful. He stood by the stove, turning a kettle over a flame that looked like it had been burning all night. The man didn't look at her yet. His back was broad, shirt sleeves rolled just past the elbows, the side of his jaw marked by a few days' growth. His hands moved steady, no rush in a way. He lifted the lid, poured into a mug, set it down. You're at my place. You came in with a snake bite. Almost too late. She licked her lips, but they cracked. You. Her voice cracked too. You looked. I did. He finally turned. Had to. He walked over and handed her the mug. His fingers brushed hers by accident. He didn't react. Neither did she. The warmth of the drink hit her stomach like a stone. Not because it hurt, but because it meant she was alive. How long? She asked. Since dusk yesterday. He pulled over a chair, sat across from the bed. Not close enough to crowd her, but not far enough to seem afraid. Fever broke before dawn. You're past the worst. She shifted again, slower this time. The fabric of her dress had been pinned at the thigh with one of his shirt buttons, the cut wrapped clean in cloth that looked boiled and tied by someone who'd done this kind of thing before. Her jaw tightened. Who are you? Michael Creel. She nodded once. Mava. They didn't shake hands. He didn't ask where she'd come from, and she didn't offer it. But she noticed his eyes scan the bruises on her wrists, the half-healed cuts along her collar. He didn't flinch. He didn't pity her either. Instead, he stood again, moved to the shelf, brought down a small tin, and set it beside the mug. For the swelling. Ointment's bitter, but it works. Mava took it. Her fingers trembled. She hated that. Hated showing weakness, especially after what she'd crawled out of. But Michael didn't point it out. He was already back by the stove, stirring something in a pan that smelled faintly of beans and salt pork. She looked around the room more closely. Everything had its place. Nails lined up on a wood slab, rope coiled neatly, tools sharpened and oiled, a shelf of folded cloth, a rifle in the corner, not locked up, but not flaunted either. This wasn't a drunkard's shack or a lonely man's pit. It was lived in, but clean, useful. You live alone? He nodded. She looked at him again. His face didn't give away much. There was something settled in his eyes, like someone who'd made peace with being left alone. Mava rubbed at her arm. You're not going to ask where I came from? He shook his head. You'll say when you're ready. No man had ever answered her like that. No man had ever waited. They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't push or pull. Just was. When she finished the drink, he took the mug and rinsed it without a word. She laid back slowly, the pain fading but not gone. Her body still didn't feel like hers, but it was here, and it was safe for now. Outside, a horse snorted in the corral. Somewhere, a hinge creaked in the breeze. Michael opened the door halfway, stood there for a long moment, just watching the empty trail. Mava turned her face to the wall and finally slept without fear. The morning came hot and clear, with no clouds to break the sun's climb. Cicadas screamed from the mesquite trees just past the fence. Dust shimmered off the rocks behind the barn. Inside the cabin, the stove had gone cold, and the bed was empty. Michael noticed it the second he stepped back in with an armload of firewood. He didn't call her name, just paused near the doorway, eyes drifting toward the folded blanket at the foot of the cot, then down to the small tin of salve sitting untouched beside it. The cabin was quiet. He set the wood down, wiped his hands on his trousers, and stepped outside again, scanning the yard. She was near the corral, holding onto the fence with both hands, her left leg stiff and shaking as she tried to shift weight onto it. The makeshift bandage had loosened. Her breathing was shallow, brow wet, jaw clenched hard against the pain. He didn't say anything. Mava glanced over, then looked away just as quick. She didn't want help. That much was plain. Michael walked past her toward the barn. He opened the door, grabbed a leather strap from the pegboard, and came back out with it coiled in one hand. She watched without speaking. He knelt near her and tightened the bandage with clean cloth and a new strap, tugging it until it held her thigh steady. She didn't flinch. "You'll tear it open again if you don't slow down," he said, standing. "I don't like lying down," she replied. Her voice was dry but steady. "You don't have to lie down, but you need to pace it." She nodded once. No attitude, just truth. They stood like that for a while. Two people not used to talking. Two people too tired for pretending. "You work with horses?" she asked, eyes on the corral. "Used to. Cavalry first, then private work. Now just mine." She looked over at the stallion in the pen, a tall black with deep eyes and a notched ear. "What's his name?" "Doesn't have one." "That's no good," she said. "He looks like he earned something." Michael gave the faintest smirk, then looked back at the house. "You hungry?" She didn't answer, just turned and followed him. Inside, she moved slower. Her leg dragged a bit, but she didn't complain. She took a seat on the crate near the table, both hands resting in her lap like she was holding something fragile that might spill. Michael served 2 plates, fried eggs, a thin strip of bacon, dry cornbread. She ate fast but without desperation. Measured, focused, like someone who'd gone hungry before and learned how not to look starved. When she finished, she sat back, rubbing her thumb along the edge of the tin plate. "I came from north of here," she said finally. "Camp in the hills. Small group of men. Didn't give names." Michael didn't move. "They kept me after a raid," she went on. "Killed the folks I was with. Took what was left." Her voice didn't tremble, but her fingers pressed harder against the tin. "I waited until the younger one got drunk and wandered off. Then I ran. Didn't think I'd make it." "You did," Michael said. Mavis studied his face. "You believe in luck?" "No. Me neither." The words hung for a second. Then she reached for the bandage again, testing the leather strap. "This'll hold," she said. "I'll start sweeping the porch." "You don't need to do that." "I know." She stood. He didn't stop her. Outside, the broom leaned against the wall. She picked it up with both hands and started from the edge inward, pushing slow and even, her weight shifting as she found her rhythm. Michael sat on the porch step with a tin cup of coffee, silent as ever. She didn't ask for his story. He didn't offer it. But for the first time in years, the sound of bristles on wood didn't feel like noise. It sounded like someone meant to stay. Late afternoon brought wind down from the high rocks, sharp enough to carry grit into the eyes. The kind of wind that wore out a man's patience if he let it. Michael didn't. He was out by the fence line with pliers in one hand, a coil of wire slung over his shoulder, his hat pulled low, and his mouth set in a line. A rail had come loose in the night. Might have been coyotes nosing through. He didn't care why. He just cared it got fixed. He heard her before he saw her, boots stepping light across dry ground. She wasn't wearing that torn dress anymore. She'd taken one of his old work shirts from the hook by the door, rolled the sleeves to her elbows, and tied a length of twine around the waist to hold it in place. Her legs were bare to the knees. The bruises hadn't faded, but she didn't walk like someone hiding anymore. "You got another pair of gloves?" she asked, stopping near the fence post. He nodded toward the saddlebag by the stump. She walked over, dug them out, then pulled them on slow. Her hands were smaller than his, but she didn't complain about the fit. Just got to work, gripping the rail steady while he twisted the wire taut. They didn't talk. Wind howled over the ridge behind them. A hawk circled overhead once, then disappeared west. The sun was dropping, and the shadows stretched long. Maeve was focused, not distracted. She watched how he bent the wire, saw how he used his knee for leverage, studied his grip. She didn't ask questions. She learned by doing. When the job was done, she brushed her palms off and looked down the line. "How many more of these posts need fixing?" 4, maybe 5. "I can help." Michael didn't nod, didn't argue. He simply walked to the next break. They finished by sundown. As they made their way back, the ground turned orange under their boots. The smell of warm dirt mixed with distant sage. It was quiet, but not empty. She walked beside him, not behind. Inside the cabin, she moved to the stove, checked the fire, and added wood without being asked. He watched her from the table, how she handled herself, how her shoulders no longer curled inward like they had that first night. She didn't sit until the kettle started to boil. Then she poured water over dried beans and set the lid down slow. I used to help my father fix pens, she said. Before the raid. Michael sipped from his cup. We didn't have much, just a patch of land. But I knew every board, every rope knot, every tool had a place. Her voice wasn't nostalgic, just factual, like reading off a list. He listened without shifting. Just let her speak. They killed him first, she added. They didn't even ask for anything. Just came in guns drawn, took what they saw, and left the rest burning. Michael stared at the grain in the table, his jaw still. He didn't interrupt. I don't expect this place to fix me, she said. I just needed somewhere they wouldn't find. You got it, he replied. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask her to. Later that evening, after supper, she folded the borrowed shirt before bed and set it beside the cot. He looked over once, saw the gesture, and said nothing. But the next morning, she found another shirt folded neatly on the bench. Washed. Smaller fit. No note. Just there. That night, Mavis slept with both hands resting flat against the quilt. And Michael, he stepped outside, leaned against the porch beam, and stayed there till the moon cleared the ridge. He didn't know what he was waiting for. But for once, the waiting didn't feel heavy. By mid-morning, the heat had already settled into the valley like it didn't plan to leave. Wind pressed down instead of blowing through, thick with dust and dry seed. Michael had taken the wagon up the northern ridge for supplies. 2 sacks of grain, salt blocks, and some spare nails from a rancher who owed him a favor. It was the first time he'd left the property since bringing Mava in. He didn't tell her when he'd be back. He just hitched the team, checked the wheel hubs, and rode off with a nod. Mava watched him go from the porch, the coffee cup warm in her hands. She didn't wave. He hadn't asked for one. The cabin felt strange without him. Not unsafe, just unfamiliar. The silence inside wasn't the same kind that filled outlaw camps. It didn't carry threat or judgment. It wasn't waiting to break. It just existed, steady, like the windmill or the worn boards beneath her feet. She spent a while clearing the stove area, folding the bedding, and wiping down the lantern glass. Each task took longer than it should have. Her legs still ached, though she didn't limp as much as before. She didn't sit down. Moving helped her think straight. By midday, the chores were done. She stood at the doorway, scanning the fence line. The horses hadn't been fed yet. She made her way across the yard to the feed shed, pausing to check the latch, intact. Inside, the scent of alfalfa and leather was sharp. Dust motes floated in narrow beams of light, leaking through cracks in the wood. The black stallion in the corral eyed her cautiously, ears flicking. He was big, broad through the shoulders, lean along the flank. Battle-worn, like the man who owned him. His tail whipped once, but he didn't back away when she approached. Mava filled the trough slow, measured. No sudden moves. She had handled animals before, but not since the raid, not since the days when she'd had a name worth calling. The stallion stepped forward once the oats hit the pan, chewing with slow, deliberate rhythm. She stayed outside the rails, hands gripping the post. "You need a name," she said under her breath. The stallion's ear twitched. She turned toward the other pen, smaller, holding a chestnut mare with a white streak down her face. Gentle, probably the one used for travel. She was thin and hadn't been brushed in days. Mava fetched a soft bristle brush from the hook and let herself into the gate slowly. She kept her hands visible, her steps steady. The mare backed once, then froze, uncertain. Mava stood still, letting the air settle. After a minute, she reached forward. The brush met skin, and the mare exhaled. The motion soothed something in her. The quiet between each stroke, the dust rising from the coat, the way the horse leaned in just slightly, it all felt clean, honest. She worked until the coat shined. Afterward, she refilled both water pans, checked the fencing, and cleared out old feed near the corner. When she turned back toward the cabin, she saw Michael's wagon rolling over the ridge in the distance. She stayed put, leaning her elbow on the fence rail. She didn't want to be inside when he arrived. She wanted him to see her here. Upright. Useful. The wagon creaked down the trail, wheels biting into gravel. He didn't speed up when he saw her, just slowed to a steady roll and brought the team to a stop beside the post. He stepped down, unslung the sacks, and set them on the porch. "You didn't have to do all that," he said without looking at her. I know, she answered. But I did. He glanced once at the mare's clean coat, then at the feed pan. Good work, he said. She nodded. They carried the sacks together, side by side. No words passed between them until the last one thudded into place against the wall. I used to feed 12 before sunrise, she said, brushing dust off her hands. Michael turned toward her. That was your family's ranch? She nodded, back before it burned. Neither of them moved for a long second. Then Michael reached into the back of the wagon, pulled out a tin can wrapped in brown paper, and handed it to her. Coffee. Better than what I've got. She took it without question. They sat on the porch as the sun slipped behind the ridge. He handed her a clean cup. The coffee was dark, slightly bitter. She drank anyway. The mare's yours to use if you need to ride out someday, he said finally. Maeva looked over at the animal grazing near the barn. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Not unless you tell me to. I won't. That was it. No promise. No contract. Just fact. The last light of day caught on the hills and faded. A night board called from somewhere high in the rocks. Inside, the cabin stayed warm long after the fire went out. And outside, on the porch, two people sat still, facing forward, each knowing what it meant to stay without needing to say it. Dawn came without ceremony. No bird song, no breeze. Just a slow shift of gray light through the slats in the window, painting lines across the floorboards. The air smelled of ash and cold iron. Maeva opened her eyes before the cabin stirred. The heat from the stove had gone out sometime in the night. The blanket covering her shoulders had slipped down to her waist. She sat up carefully. Her leg ached, but the stiffness was manageable now. She didn't wince, just waited for her feet to adjust to the floor's chill, then stood without using the cot for balance. Michael wasn't in the room. His hat was gone from the hook. The rifle, too. She moved to the stove, opened the iron door, and stared at the dead coals inside. No smoke, no glow. She laid a few small twigs across the grate, added kindling, and lit a match from the box on the shelf. Her hands were steady. The fire caught quick, climbing up the twigs in small blue flames. She added a split log, shut the door, and waited. By the time Michael returned, his boots were lined with frost and a fresh rabbit hung by its legs from a loop on his belt. His coat was damp near the collar. He nodded once at her, hung the carcass by the beam, and unlaced his gloves. Woke early, he said. So did I, she replied. He poured water into the kettle, set it on the flame, and glanced toward the rifle leaning near the door. Tracks near the barn. Small prints. Not human. Coyotes, she asked. Could be. Or something looking for scraps. Maeva moved toward the counter, pulled down the cutting board, and reached for the tin of salt. She didn't ask. She just prepared the knife and began dressing the rabbit where it hung. Michael watched for a moment, then walked outside without comment. By noon, the meat had been cured and set to smoke in the iron box beside the barn. Maeva wiped her hands on her apron, one she found folded near the pantry that morning, freshly laundered. Probably hadn't been used in years. She stepped outside, squinting at the sun overhead. The yard was dry again. The wind had returned, light but constant, carrying fine sand that bit the skin if you stood too long. She shaded her face and scanned the hills past the fence line. Michael was behind the shed, working on a broken gate hinge. The clang of metal against wood echoed faintly. She walked over, holding the bucket of nails in one hand, the hammer in the other. You were going to ask for these, she said. I was. She handed them off, crouched beside the post, and held the frame steady while he set the hinge. Been thinking about staying past spring, she said after a while. If that's all right. He didn't pause the work, just drove the final nail into place, then straightened and stretched his back. Nothing wrong with that, he said. The words didn't hold surprise or hesitation, just quiet agreement. That evening, they didn't speak much. After supper, Maeva cleaned the plates while he sharpened a set of chisels on the porch. The scraping sound was rhythmic, calming in a strange way. The sun dipped fast behind the ridge, casting the whole yard in orange shadow. Before heading inside, Michael stepped into the barn to check on the mare. When he didn't return after several minutes, Maeva followed. She found him standing in the corner stall, eyes fixed on something in the straw. A canvas sack had been torn open, feed scattered. A faint trail of small prints led out the side hatch. Wasn't coyotes, he said. Raccoons, maybe. Or something smarter. Tracks curved back around. He nodded. Twice. She walked the perimeter with him. The prints were shallow but clear. Barefoot. Adult-sized. He knelt once, brushing away the loose dirt with his palm. Mavis stood over him, studying the direction they led. Someone's watching. Looks that way. They spent the next hour reinforcing the hatch, moving feed to a locked crate, and setting a tripwire near the corral path. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Mava boiled water before bed. She poured 2 mugs, added crushed chamomile from a pouch he'd brought home days earlier. Michael sat near the table, rolling a fresh cartridge between his fingers, lost in thought. They'll come back, she said quietly. Maybe. If they do, I'll be ready. He looked up at her, held her gaze longer than usual. I know. She turned away, set the mugs on the table, and sat across from him. That night, she didn't sleep in her old place. She spread a blanket near the window and kept a lantern low beside her. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark outside. Michael didn't argue. When morning arrived, the cabin was still. No prints, no signs, just wind and dust and the quiet thud of a heartbeat shared between 2 people who now watched for trouble together. By the 4th night, the air shifted. The stillness that once wrapped the ranch like a blanket had thinned into something brittle. The coyotes stopped calling. The wind ran straight lines across the dirt without turning back. The kind of silence that made animals freeze mid-step. Mava felt it before she heard anything. She hadn't meant to sleep. She'd sat near the window again, legs crossed, boots still on, the rifle resting upright against the wall beside her. Her eyes closed sometime past midnight, just for a minute. Then something, movement or instinct, snapped them open again. A sound, not loud. A scrape, faint. Wood on wood. Not inside the cabin. Close. She didn't breathe. Michael lay on the cot, one arm over his eyes. The soft rhythm of his breath told her he hadn't heard. Mavis stood slowly. No words. No hesitation. She reached for the rifle. The weight of it filled her arms like it belonged there. She stepped barefoot across the floor, crouched low at the edge of the window frame, and waited. Nothing moved. Then there, a shape near the fence post. Thin, stooped, one hand touching the wire, testing. Her grip tightened. She eased the door open, just wide enough to slip through. The night air bit her skin. Cold settled in the pit of her stomach. Outside, the moonlight cut across the yard in slivers. The shadow moved again, low to the ground now. Trying not to be seen, she raised the rifle to her shoulder, thumb on the hammer, breath held tight behind her teeth. Don't move, she said loud enough to carry. Step back from the fence. The shape froze, then stood slowly. A man, unshaven, clothes torn, eyes glassy even from a distance. He didn't speak, just stared at her. Then his gaze drifted toward the barn. Step back, she repeated. Behind her, the door creaked. Michael stepped out without his coat, boots half-laced, pistol in one hand. Mava didn't lower her rifle. Who is it? He asked. Somebody hungry, she said. Or trying to look like it. The man's voice came rough. Ain't here to steal. Just need a place to rest. Michael's stance didn't change. You've been circling the property for 3 nights. Didn't know if it was safe. You know now. The stranger raised both hands. I'm not armed. Michael stepped off the porch, kept distance. Turn around. The man obeyed. No weapon. No pack. Just dirt, bones, and desperation. Mava didn't lower the rifle until Michael nodded. You can sleep in the shed, he said. One night. You come near the house. You'll be buried on this land. The man nodded once. No protest. Michael tossed him a blanket from a porch. You eat in the morning. Then you leave. The man took it and limped toward the shed without another word. Mava finally stepped back inside. Her hands didn't shake until she set the rifle down. Michael closed the door behind him. You handled it clean? She nodded, sat down hard on the crate by the table, palms on her knees. He was watching us, she said. Yeah. He wasn't alone the first night. I saw 2 sets of tracks. I noticed. You didn't say anything. I was waiting to see what you'd do. She turned to him, eyes narrowing. And you didn't freeze. You didn't ask. Mava didn't smile. Just leaned forward, elbows to thighs. I've had enough of men breaking in. I know. He poured water into the tin kettle, set on the stove without striking a match. His hands worked from habit, slow and even. She sat there for a long time, staring at the door. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. I did, he said, but there was nowhere to go where I wouldn't still be me. Her eyes softened slightly. That's honest. It's all I got left. The kettle hissed once, barely audible. Michael didn't move to light the fire. Instead, he sat down across from her, resting his pistol on the table between them. You think he'll try something tonight? She asked. No. Why not? Because you aimed at his heart before he said a word. Silence returned. This time it was earned. They didn't speak again until morning. And when the sun rose, the man was gone, left before first light. No prints led past the ridge. Just a pile of stones where the fire pit had been, neatly stacked, as if to say thank you without speaking. Maeva made breakfast that day. Michael didn't stop her. She poured his coffee without asking how he took it. He drank it all the same. And when the horses neighed at the fence line, she went out first, rifle slung over her back. She wasn't waiting for trouble anymore. She was guarding what was hers. A week passed without incident. No new tracks, no strange noises past dusk. The animals stayed calm, the birds returned to their early songs, and the stillness outside became bearable again. Maeva no longer flinched when the wind knocked the tool hook against the barn door. Her eyes had stopped darting toward shadows that moved too fast. It was the fourth day after the stranger vanished that she walked the perimeter alone and noticed a broken gap near the east post. One of the old rails had rotted through and collapsed under its own weight. The fence held, but barely. She followed the edge to where it met the dry wash and crouched low, fingers brushing along the warped wood. A weak point. Anyone determined could slip through. That afternoon, while Michael repaired harnesses near the porch, she carried lumber from the lean-to to the broken post, one beam at a time. He watched her from the shade, eyes narrowed, not in disapproval, but in curiosity. She said nothing, just worked. She pulled out the old rails, cleared the debris, and dug in 2 new anchors. The ground fought her with every stroke of the shovel, but she didn't slow down. Her shirt stuck to her back, boots kicked dust into the wind, arms ached from swinging the hammer, but she kept at it. Not because anyone told her to, because the gap had no place in this life she was building. Michael didn't offer help. He understood what it meant for someone to claim something by their own effort. By late afternoon, she had measured and cut each new beam, fitted the crossbars, and aligned the hinges by hand. The gate was rough but solid. She tested it twice, open, closed, latch tight. Only when the last nail was set did she step back and wipe her brow. Michael joined her near the fence, holding a tin of cool water. She drank deep, then leaned against the post. You built it right, he said. It needed doing, she replied. He ran a palm over the top rail. Most would have just braced it with wire. I'm not most. He nodded once. I know. They walked the line together, checking each section. Maeva pointed out where the soil had dipped near the far end. Michael agreed to add rock fill the next day. It wasn't a conversation. They simply moved through the task like they'd done it for years. That evening, she found him near the barn sorting tack. She sat on a bale of hay across from him, hands resting on her knees. This place, she said, it doesn't feel temporary anymore. Michael didn't look up. It wasn't meant to be. For you maybe. For anyone willing to stay. She picked up a leather strap, ran her fingers along the worn stitching. You ever think about giving it a name? He paused, then set the strap aside. No. She looked toward the ridge where the hills caught the last orange light of day. Feels like it needs one. What would you call it? Maeva tilted her head. Safe enough, she said. That's all I ever wanted. Michael's eyes didn't move, but something shifted in his jaw, like a knot untied inside him. They didn't talk about it again. Instead, the next morning, she found a wood plaque resting on the porch rail. Letters carved in rough script. Safe enough. She ran her hand across the letters slow. He passed by carrying feed for the animals. Didn't mention the sign. She nailed it to the gatepost after supper. That night, she set an extra place at the table without thinking. She cooked beans with cumin and cut the cornbread into clean squares instead of breaking it rough. She swept the cabin even though no one tracked dirt inside that day. And when Michael stepped in from his evening check, she handed him a bowl without being asked. "You sleep better these days?" he asked between bites. "Not as light," she answered. "I don't listen for the wrong footsteps anymore." "You're not waiting to run?" "No." They ate in silence for a while. "I used to think I'd die alone," she said, quiet. "Somewhere no one would know my name." He looked up, chewing slowed. "But I remembered what it felt like to be called something kind. To be asked if I wanted coffee without anything expected in return." He set the spoon down. "You got more coming than just kindness here." She nodded once. "I know." When they finished, she gathered the dishes. He dried. No conversation needed. Routine was its own comfort. The fire burned low as they sat by the window. Outside, coyotes called in the distance again. This time, Maeva didn't tense. She closed her eyes and listened, arms crossed loosely over her chest. When she finally rose to turn in, Michael stood too. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll start on the East Corral. Needs reinforcing." She gave a tired smile. "I'll be up before you." "We'll see." As she lay on the cot, one arm tucked beneath her head, she heard him pacing once across the floor. Then the lamp went out. Sleep came faster now, because the ranch wasn't a place she stumbled into anymore. It was hers and his, both still healing, but finally standing on land that didn't ask for anything except that they stay. The final signs of summer faded quietly. The mesquite trees browned at the edges, and the riverbed that rarely ran full now trickled just enough to carry frogs and dragonflies along the shallows. The nights cooled faster, the mornings carried mist, and the light that once baked the ground now slid across it like a warning. Change was coming. Inside the cabin, Maeva folded the last of the blankets and stored them in the cedar trunk beside the cot. She hadn't needed them for weeks. The stove kept the place warm now, and the rhythm of each day had settled into something she could rely on. Wake before sunrise, brew coffee, sweep ash, tend to the mare, feed the black stallion who still hadn't earned a name, but had stopped flinching when she reached out. Michael spent his mornings repairing saddles, mending harnesses, checking the roof for leaks before the season turned fully. Neither of them spoke much during chores. They didn't have to. On the 10th day since she'd built the gate, he returned from town with a box tucked under one arm and an envelope in the pocket of his coat. He set the box on the table without a word and went to the barn. Maeva waited until she heard the stall door creak before she opened it. Inside was a folded cotton dress, simple, slate blue, with a leather cord sewn into the waist. Not new, but clean and carefully chosen. Beneath it, a wrapped packet of hairbrushes and a small tin of lavender salve. She closed the lid and didn't speak of it that night. The next day, she wore the dress while stacking firewood. The sleeves were too long, but she rolled them to the elbows. When Michael returned from repairing the west gate, he looked once, nodded, and passed her a full canteen without making comment. That evening, they sat outside while the sun disappeared behind the hills. Maeva leaned against the post of the porch, one leg tucked beneath her, mug in both hands. The dirt road that led toward town lay still in the distance. Nothing moved. No dust. No noise. Only quiet. "You ever think about building a second room?" she asked. Michael took a slow sip from his cup, eyes on the ridge. "Thought about it." She turned her head toward him. "What stopped you?" "Wasn't anybody to build it for." The wind carried the scent of ash and something faintly sweet from the wildflowers near the fence. She didn't answer. Later that night, she heard him hammering something onto the inside wall of the barn. Not fast, measured, like a man trying to be precise. She didn't ask, just watched him disappear through the dark with a lantern swinging from his left hand. The following morning, she found it. Above the small workbench, nailed to a beam polished from years of use, was a carved wood plaque. Maeva. No title, no last name, no explanation. Just her name, marked into the same wall where he kept his tools, notes, and ledger. The space no one else had ever touched. She ran her fingers over the letters, slow and careful. Beneath them, a peg had been added. Just one, clean and sturdy. A place to hang something that mattered. When he came in to fetch the saddle oil, he found her standing there. "You made this." He set the tin down, wiped his hands on his trousers. "Use what was left from the gatepost. You didn't ask if I wanted it. Didn't need to." She nodded once. It's good. He didn't smile. He never did. But he stood straighter than usual. That afternoon, they moved the tools to one side and cleared a second work surface. Maeva hung her gloves on the new peg and set a row of trimmed leather scraps in a small box beneath it. The cabin didn't feel like his anymore. It felt like theirs. As the last week of the season pressed forward, they prepared for winter without speaking of it. More firewood was stacked behind the barn. The door hinges were checked and oiled. The blankets were shaken out and folded clean. Maeva sealed dried beans into jars and lined them under the bed. Michael crafted a new latch for the front door. Each action held weight. They weren't surviving anymore. They were living together. On the last day of the month, Michael rose early and hitched the mare. He told her he was heading to the Miller Ranch 2 towns over, trading for a water pump. Said he'd be back before sundown. Maeva stood in the yard as he rode off. She watched until the dust behind the wagon settled. Then she went inside and cleared the table. That evening, when he returned, she met him at the fence with her hands coated in flour. Her hair was braided back, her sleeves rolled up, and the cabin behind her smelled like baked cornbread and roasted meat. Michael stepped down from the wagon slowly, gaze scanning the yard. He caught the scent in the air, glanced at her apron, then at the smoke drifting from the chimney. You cooked, he said. Felt like a good day, too. They ate at the table, quiet as usual. But her plate was full, and his cup stayed warm. At the end of the meal, she poured 2 more servings and didn't clear the table right away. Instead, she set a hand on the wood and spoke without looking at him. This place gave me back something I thought I'd buried. Michael's eyes stayed on his cup. I didn't think I'd feel safe again, she said. Or needed. Or seen. He didn't interrupt. Just listened. You didn't rescue me, she added. You gave me room to come back on my own. He finally raised his head. I wanted you to know, I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever. His fingers tapped once on the table's edge. Then we'll build that second room. She looked at him. He looked back. You sure? She asked. Michael stood, walked to the shelf, and took down a folded cloth. Inside it, a silver ring. Plain. Worn. No stone. He set it in front of her. It was my mother's. I kept it because it belonged to someone who stayed. Maeva reached out, picked it up, and turned it between her fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. I'll wear it, she said. He didn't smile, but he reached for her hand and slid it onto her finger anyway. That night, no fire was lit, because the warmth in the room didn't come from flame. It came from 2 people who no longer needed to ask what they were building. They already knew. And when the morning came, they stood side by side at the gate she had built, beneath the sign that bore her name, on land he had kept alive and called a home.